Maybe she'll take care of you.
Yeah, that might be. Good evening and welcome to the regular meeting of the Sugar Land City Council. Tonight, Himesh is going to lead us in the invocation, followed by the pledge. And then after that, we're going to do a brief oath of office, and then we'll be into our agenda items. Himesh?
Thank you, Mayor. Please join me in prayer.
Lord, we ask that you provide us the guidance and knowledge we seek to make the best decisions for our city and our residents. Please continue to keep our first responders safe and out of harm's way. We also ask that you protect our soldiers in the military who spend their lives protecting and defending our freedoms. We thank you for giving us the opportunity and privilege to live and work in our great city that we all love so much. And it's in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Marion, I'm going to ask you to come down to the front. This is Marion Nixon, and she has volunteered to be on the Animal Advisory Board. And we very much appreciate you doing that.
My honor.
I'm going to bring you out here, so we're going to make sure we get a good picture of you.
Oh, my gosh, okay. All right. Hi, everybody.
And Marion, if you'll repeat after me.
Yes. I, Marion Nixon,
do solemnly swear or affirm
do solemnly swear and affirm
that I will faithfully execute
that I will faithfully execute
the duties of the office of
the duties of the office of the
Animal
Advisory Board
Yes, ma'am. Of the City of Sugar Land,
of the City of Sugar Land,
County of Fort Bend,
County of Fort Bend, State of Texas.
Yes, ma'am. And will to the best of my ability preserve,
and will to the best of my ability to preserve,
protect,
and
defend the Constitution
defend the Constitution
and the laws of the United States
in the laws of the United States
and of this state,
and of this state,
and the charter and ordinances of the city.
and the charter and ordinance of the city.
And I furthermore solemnly swear
And I furthermore solemnly swear
that I have not directly
that I have not directly
or indirectly paid,
or indirectly paid,
offered,
offered,
or promised to pay,
or promised to pay,
contributed, or promised to contribute any money
any money
or valuable thing,
or valuable things,
or promised any public office
or promise any public office
or employment
or employment
as a reward to secure my appointment
or as a ward to secure my appointment,
or the confirmation thereof, so help me God.
or the confirmation or them, so help me
The
God.
confirmation thereof, so help me God.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you,
ma'am.
sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm not done yet.
No, ma'am.
Oh,
Come on up here and we'll counsel. If
oh, aren't you nice? I'm ready. Glasses off.
there, oh, we go. Well, I'll keep mine on, or I won't be able to see.
Okay, 1, 2, 3. One more. 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
all.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, sir.
Now we're going to move to item number 2, the public comment portion. This is designed for anybody that would like to speak on one of the items on the agenda, which is not a public hearing. And tonight, we don't have any public hearings. So if you want to speak on one of the agenda items, if you'll approach the podium, identify yourself and your address. Anyone? Second call. Going to move on to item number 3, review of consent agenda. Item number 4, consent agenda. All the items on the consent agenda are routine business. We've had a request by one of the council members to pull one of those items. We're going to take all the other items, and then we'll have a brief presentation on that agenda item. We're going to pull item number 4B. 4D? 4D.
Mayor, I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda excluding item number D.
Second.
Got a motion by Gandhi, second by Mitchell. And if you'll vote at this time, please. How about we do a hand vote? Aye? And it's a 6, Jennifer, you in? 6-0? 6-0 vote. Oh, here? Okay. We don't have them all. So we've got, the ayes have it 6-0. Councilmember Porter's out tonight. Okay, the item we're going to pull is 6D. Let me read the item. 6D, consideration of an action on the acceptance of the FEMA Hazard Mitigation Grant. D. Yeah, D. Consideration of an action on the acceptance of the FEMA Hazard Mitigation Grant in the amount of $199,990 for the Flood Early Warning System project, with the city's local cost sharing being 25%, or $49,997.50. We have Mr. Jorge Alba, our Senior Engineering Manager. Jorge, before you give your presentation, so what we're going to have is Jorge is going to go through the presentation. Council members will ask any clarifying questions about that. Staff will sit down. We'll take a motion in a second, and then council, if there's any discussion between the council members, we'll have the discussion with the council members. Jorge, go ahead.
So I don't really have a prepared presentation, but I'm going to summarize basically what the grants is all about. Back in 2017, July 2017, the City Council approved for the engineering department to apply for a hazard mitigation grant program with FEMA to update our flood and rain gauges that we had in the city. Our gauges were installed back in 2004 and 2006, and they were what were called Alert 1 gauges, Alert 1 type, and we needed to update to Alert 2, so actually we can read them and not stop losing data with those gauges. So in 2017 again, in July 2017, City Council approved for us to apply for the grant. It took a little bit of while for FEMA to approve the grant, actually a year and a half, But finally, on December 4, we received the grant approval from FEMA for an amount of $199,990, which the city is responsible for 25% of that amount. With this grant, what we are going to do is we are going to update our existing 16 gauges, and we are going to add 11 more gauges. So we are going to have a total of, 12 more gauges. We're going to have a total of 28 gauges in the city, covering the entire city, including the two areas that we annexed recently, the Graywood and New Territory areas. So with that, if the City Council has any questions.
Bridget?
Pulled this is I really wanted our residents to know that we have applied for this grant. Everybody was so affected by Harvey, even if we did not get flooded, it was extremely scary. So I want our residents to know that we have applied for this grant and that we are being proactive in making sure we keep our residents safe. And I'll make the motion to approve.
I've got a motion by Councilmember Young, second by Councilmember McCutcheon. Any clarifying questions of staff? Amy?
Where's the other 150,000 going? It's just about $200,000 grant.
No, the way it works is the total grant is for $199,000.
Yes.
But FEMA only pays 75% of that money, so we have to pay the 25%. So basically, they pay $150,000, and we have to match $25,000. I mean, no.
49,997.
No, the remaining portion to complete the 200,000.
And so we're paying the money to who?
Well, they reimburse us only for the 75%. For every dollar that we spend, they reimburse us for the 75% only.
There we go. That's what I was trying to clarify.
Yeah, so
if we spend 200,000, we are going to get back 150,000 essentially.
Correct. That's correct.
There you go. Thank you.
That's
that was my clarifying question. I appreciate it.
Any questions, council? I've got a motion by Young, second by McCutcheon. If you'll vote at this time. We've got hand vote, please. And we've got a 6-0 vote.
And can I make one comment? So sorry.
Sure.
Thank you so much for proactively applying for this grant so we could have those funds reimbursed to us, because we were going to have to spend that money no matter what. Right. So I really appreciate your hard work and dedication to our city in finding funds which will help reimburse us our necessary costs.
My pleasure.
Item number 5, contracts and agreements. 5A, consideration of an action on authorizing execution of a contract with Federal Engineering, Inc. in the amount of $70,000 for the Public Safety Dispatch Comprehensive Assessment. And we've got Ms. Karen Ramirez, Performance and Accountability Manager. Karen.
Hi, good evening, Mayor and City Council. All right. So I'll begin with the background. The Office of Performance and Accountability is responsible for conducting departmental assessments that promote organizational accountability initiatives which focus on continuous improvements and identifying process enhancements and efficiencies. Here is a list of assessments our office conducted or led. The fire, EMS, and police assessments were conducted by external consultants similar to the assessment we are presenting to you today. On October 3rd, we posted the ad for the RFQ with a due date of October 25th. In total, we received 9 submittals and held firm interviews with the top 2 firms on December 4th. The selection team decided on Federal Engineering due to them having previous experience with the city, their expertise with public safety dispatch centers, and also they have experience with cities and counties within Texas. The contract amount is for $70,000. That was the funds were budgeted for FY19. Also, here with us today is Mr. Michael Kennedy. He is the Vice President of Federal Engineering, and he's happy to answer any questions you may have about the firm. So the assessment project team will include members of the following departments. Federal Engineering provided an estimate of 16 weeks for project duration. That includes the final report. And after receiving the final report, we will come back to you with the findings and recommendations. And with that, staff requests consideration of an action on a contract with Federal Engineering, Inc. in the amount of $70,000 for the Public Safety Dispatch Comprehensive Assessment. Any questions?
Any clarifying questions of staff? Amy?
What made them the top choice?
So overall, just their experience. We thought that they had a well-rounded experience. Some of the other firms were more specific with technical assessments, and they also had different experience that we were not looking for. We were looking more for a well-rounded experience, and I think the firm that we selected demonstrates that.
And in terms of cost of the contract, how did theirs compare to the others?
So because it was a request for qualifications, we went based on their qualifications.
Okay. Thank you.
Got a motion by Young, second by Gandhi. Any other discussion? Your vote is this time, please. And it's a 6-0 vote. Thank you. Moving on to item number 6, workshop, 6A, review of and discussion on draft policy on request for funding public destination venue capital enhancement projects. And our Assistant City Manager, Jennifer May, is going to introduce our guest, our staff. Jennifer?
Thank you, Mayor. So we have a tradition here in the city of Sugar Land that we like to introduce staff members when they're making their first presentation. And so it's my honor to get to introduce to you Whitney Williams, who's one of our management assistants who has done a great job assisting on this project. Whitney comes to us from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where she graduated from Spelman College, earning a Bachelor's of Arts in Political Science, and then after college worked for the Louisiana state government for a number of years before going to grad school at the University of Arizona in Tucson. And so we are very excited to have Whitney here, and thank you for letting me introduce her.
Elizabeth, you're gaining some ground over there with Louisiana. You got some more folks. Whitney, welcome.
Good afternoon, Mayor and City Council. It is my pleasure to present a review of the draft policy on request for funding public destination venue capital enhancement. Tonight we will discuss destination development strategy, the outcome of the City Council Task Force's work, policy purposes and definition, capital project criteria, the process for selecting these projects, and the next steps moving forward. So the city has had a decade-plus strategy of destination development. The purpose has been to grow and solidify the economy and position us as an economic powerhouse. Within this strategy, there have been deliberate guiding principles, such as selectively choosing highest quality partners, protecting the city's business and financial interests, as well as limiting revenue sources and increasing upside sharing with the city's upfront capital investment. So with that, recently the city has had a request from a nonprofit P3 partner for city support of a capital refresher project. The City Council Economic Development Committee requested the formation of a City Council task force to look at the policy aspects of these requests, recognizing that there is definitely a benefit for additional city support for refresher projects. The task force met on 2 separate dates, September 13th and December 5th, and the meetings resulted in the creation of the draft policy that we will present to you today. So let's start with the policy purpose. The purpose is to establish guidelines for considering requests to fund a capital enhancement project after the public destination venue has been opened to the public. So a few important definitions that we wanted to highlight. Capital enhancement project is defined as a project to enhance and update infrastructure, assets, and land that are capital, physical, and enduring in nature, provide long-term added value to the city, and achieve a stated objective of the city. Public destination venue is defined as a property owned or leased by the city with facilities that attract events for the general public, like a museum. Nonprofit entity for the purpose of this policy is defined as a nonprofit under the state definition, as well as organizations operating as tax exempt under 501c3. So what is the criteria for these capital projects? The city will only consider support of capital projects with substantial benefit to our economy and community. And again, this will not include support for operational support. There is also a distinction between the types of revenue sources that each partner can apply for. Commercial partners are limited to project-generated revenues, and nonprofit partners are also eligible for SL4B contributions. So the requirements for consideration include a 50% matching requirement from the partner. The project must not conflict with any city plans, and if multiple requests are received within the fiscal year, the city will decide which project to fund by considering the amount of time since the venue opened, the number of times the venue operator requested funding, the economic benefit to the city, and the overall economic benefit, community benefit, So the process for SL4B nonprofit consideration includes a $200,000 maximum SL4B contribution, which will be determined after carryovers, keeping in mind that we will still preserve reserve for opportunities funding. Moving on, staff will then present City Council and present it to City Council and SL4B for consideration in early spring. And then staff will review the selected requests with the City Council Economic Development Committee. Before moving forward, staff will present any agreement amendments, budget amendments, hold SL4B public hearings, and provide any funding resolutions that are necessary. And any unused capacity will be released by May 31st and will be available for reserve for opportunities. And in conclusion, staff has had an extensive review and discussion with the City Council Task Force. And tonight we will receive feedback from City Council. And if you concur, in February we will have a formal consideration of the policy. Open for clarifying questions.
Ramesh.
Thank you, Mayor.
Going back on your definitions, and you went through it just a little quicker than I could see it, but was there a distinction when you have you use the term commercial in the definitions? Is there a separate piece for commercial? Because your nonprofits, your 501c3s are not going to be considered commercial, right? So do we make that distinction? I'm just concerned that I'm concerned that you're going to have a conflict between determining what is a commercial versus a nonprofit.
Mr. Mayor, it's really the definition is for the nonprofit, and that definition is relevant in terms of who is eligible for 4B funding. It's not, we use the word commercial in the presentation, but the way that the policy is written is that a capital enhancement project for a public destination venue may be funded from revenues received by the city from the project. And so there's nothing defined there.
Okay.
So anything meeting the definition of that project at a public destination venue would be eligible for project generated. We just summarized with that term.
Yeah, okay. So when she used the term commercial, that's what threw me off.
Yes, sir.
So,
Sorry.
Okay, no problem. So that takes care of my concern. Thank you, Mayor.
Amy.
In your discussion, and it may have been your second to last slide, I don't know, but it said something about $200,000. Does that $200,000 maximum annual SL4B contribution? SL4B, I think, has only a $200,000 annual limit for all projects. Could $200,000 be just on this one project? Is that the way it's being structured? did I misstate something?
No, so, Mr. Mayor, if I could. So the $200,000, this is a new program that would be established by the 4B Corporation. What I might be remembering is the joint CIP program, which also has a $200,000 maximum. So these, theoretically, the corporation could spend both of those pots of money. They're different projects. So this is a public destination venue. So one of our P3 partners would come to us and say, you know, it's been 10 years since we've opened. We'd like to make a major capital investment into the building to continue to stay relevant and fresh. They would not necessarily be kind of qualifying under the joint CIP program necessarily. So this is opening up a different avenue for.
Mayor, if I can add to that.
Commissioner.
For the council members, I applaud the EDC for coming up with a task force, number one. Number two, the task force comprised of myself, Councilmember Young, and Councilmember Mayor Zimmerman. And it really was intended to have some mirroring of that CIP program that you're referring to. So that's why you'll see the amounts are similar. The way that I think the application process, it has similarities to it. So it kind of is in line with what you're referring to.
But it's a separate program.
But it's a totally separate program for nonprofit, well, and for commercial business, as long as it's that definition issue, as long as they meet the nonprofit definitions, right? So.
Okay.
And it's not a shall, it's a, you know, if we feel that we can use this program, we would do that.
Okay. Where's the 200,000 coming from? Because now we've given SL4B another 200,000 to spend. So is that coming from something else where the money would have gone?
No, let's kind of step back. So the 4B money is sales and use tax dollars. You know, a quarter cent. It ends up being around on an annual basis 6.2 million. Some of those funds are committed to they're bracketed based on only those projects that meet the definition, which is a state definition. There have been in the past, there have been dollars that have been rolled over. So what we did was we looked at the total budget. We looked out at not only the annual budget and what dollars might be available, we looked at out over 5 years and said, given what we have in place, given what commitments we have, given what commitments we think we might have in the future, are there dollars available that could fund this program? And the answer was yes, there were dollars available to fund this program. So what we then did was we had received several applications from, call it destination venues, saying we want to refresh this, we want to do this. They didn't meet the program requirements. We said we have these funds available. It would require an entirely different program. We asked staff then to go do that program, and then that program was developed, which is a program that's before you now. But those are dollars that are available for the 200,000 out over time, say for the best we can tell for the next 5 years plus.
Okay, and I guess that's where I'm trying to make sure I understand what's being said, because the way you're saying it is 200,000 each year could be spent by SL4B. So for 5 years, 200,000 times 5 is $1 million. Is that what the thought is, that we would be spending up to $200,000 a year on these projects, or is it over 5 years we can spend 200,000?
I think it could be both. I think it could be. I don't think
could be either or. The worst case would be $200,000 per year, or $1 million over a 5-year period. Only for projects that qualify. So the key is that if a project qualifies under the definition for this program, and if you meet the requirements, which is they have to come up with their 50%, and I think it's maxed at, 75,000. So there's a cap per program.
There's no cap.
And so you end up.
I don't think there's a cap. I don't think there's a cap.
She's saying no, and he's saying no.
That's CIP.
Okay, so it's a 50% match. So up to if for 200,000, if somebody came to us with a $400,000 project, a 50% match would be 200,000.
Okay, why would we not have the same cap as we do in the CIP? Why would we not have the 75,000 cap per project?
If you want to make that recommendation, the council can take that up. We didn't put that bracket around it.
But it made sense. That's why we have it there for protection purposes. So it would seem.
For the CIP we did. We didn't put that bracket on this. Bridget.
Maybe I can clarify some of this. First of all, we do not have that many nonprofits in our city that would need this type of funding. Mainly it would be our museums, the Museum of Natural Science, maybe the Children's Museum. They make enough money every year to cover their operations and maintenance, but when they have to do new exhibits to bring new people or repeat business because you get tired of the same old exhibits, that really requires them to go out and do some types of fundraising. So they go to the George Foundation and different organizations to try to get money. So we, the city, could help organizations like that, then help us with our economic development. Obviously, museums help us greatly with our economic development and quality of life of our city. We did not put a maximum like we do with the CIP of $75,000 because we may go years without even getting a request, because how many times do you update your museum? You know, the Museum of Natural Science has had their same exhibit for 10 years, so they need to refresh theirs. So we may not even get, because there aren't, once again, there's not that many organizations within our city that's going to need this help.
The pool is vastly different between the homeowner associations that apply through the CIP program
And the
versus
number of entities
the
we
number
have.
of entities that are going to qualify under this definition.
So we don't want to tie their hands. We don't want them to be unsuccessful. And so if the money's not available for them to freshen their exhibits, then the museums could start having problems within our community. So that's why we don't have a cap on it, other than the $200,000 cap.
Okay. And P3, is that specifically for the museum? Is that what this stemmed this in the first place?
Could be the Children's Discovery Center, could be the Museum of Natural Science. There
I
probably
just know
could
that
be
the
other
museum
venues.
is 10 years old and they need to.
Right.
It could be something that doesn't exist right now.
Could be something.
Well,
You
that-
know, and-
P3 came forward with something. I just don't know what they came forward with, which is what started this ball rolling. And I was just trying to figure out what was it that they wanted.
There were two requests that have been requested, and both of them, one of them was formal, one of them was not formal. One of them was from the Children's Discovery Center.
Okay.
Again, these were non-operational funds. That's the bracket that we put around it is. It's not to be used for operations. They had to they have to do the same thing. They have to refresh their venue periodically. And they raise those monies externally through donors. Same thing with the Houston Museum of Natural Science. I think the life of the Museum of Natural Science, those exhibits are longer than what you have in the Children's Discovery Center, just because of the nature of the venue. But those were the two that came to us, one directly, one indirectly. As Himesh said, I think there could be others. We just don't know what they are. We wanted to there was no way to address it given our policy currently. We did feel that was an appropriate sales and use tax dollar expenditure. We had money in the budget. We had money not just in a 1 year time frame, because we wouldn't have been interested in doing a policy for just 1 year. We went out over 5 years, said what's the capacity? We knew about what the capacity was, what budget dollars are committed, what budget dollars are available, and felt that the $200,000 was an appropriate cap given the dollars available, which left us with flexibility for other programs for the traditional purpose of what the 4B was for.
So if the museum comes to us and says, we need to spend Children's Museum, we need to spend $400,000, then we would give $200,000 towards that if they met all the criteria. If they came to us and said, we're going to spend $200,000, we would give them $100,000 towards it. And I'm just making it clear for the record.
Right.
And and the only entities, is there any other entity other than I love museums, and I'm very, very supportive of supporting our museums. So that's not an issue, but are there any other entities that could come forward under this draft other than museums.
Sure, as long as they meet the criteria. The criteria is actually pretty broad because we don't just say museums.
Well, that's what I'm trying to figure out. So
I think
what else?
I think Cultural Arts Foundation, if that may.
Sugarland area artists.
Yeah, Sugarland area artists. What else?
Heritage Foundation.
Heritage Foundation.
Heritage Foundation has something, again, it's non-operational. So as long as it's for something that's non-operational.
A capital expenditure. So
Yeah,
it's going to be
building.
it's going to be those that have a house essentially.
So so if the Sugarland Heritage Museum came forward to us and said, we need to expand our exhibits right now, we've reached our limit of funding, that would be a way for them to get funding to help put bigger, better exhibits related to.
Provided they have the match.
Right.
And provided they meet the other criteria.
And provided they meet the criteria, right.
Yes, so that would be exactly what it's for.
Okay. Thank you.
Carol?
Question's already been answered, because I was just curious about the definition of 50% match. So it sounds like it was a $150,000 project, then we would pay half and they would pay half. It's not like we would pay 100 and they would match 50% of ours. It's an even split. Okay, thank you.
So what I'm hearing, direction from council, is you're okay with the policy. Staff, this is a workshop, so the next item would be staff would then prepare the policy for a future council action.
My one concern is maybe the very broad nature of this. I love that it's for museums, and I'm not clear if there's something else that could sneak in, and it wouldn't be a museum because they technically meet the definition. And I'm a huge supporter of all of our museums, and I understand that that is economic development, but
Councilman, I don't think the intent is to limit it to museums. I mean, it's not really to limit it to museums only. I don't consider Cultural Arts Foundation a museum, but they have a capital expenditure that could one day be needed.
yeah, and maybe that's where I'm.
You could do it with the Lakeview Auditorium. That might be another example of where it would qualify, again, a capital expenditure, not for operational.
And Mr. Mayor, keep in mind that the way it's defined right now, the public destination venue means that it's owned or leased by the city. So that definition of what a public destination venue is extremely limiting from the beginning. So there are other, I mean, like in the future, you could have new nonprofits become eligible for 4B, but they would always need to be located in a facility that's owned
Or leased
by the city. So
So then that wouldn't apply to the Sugarland Museum auditorium because it's not owned by the city. It's owned
Unless
by,
we ended up owning it.
And same thing with Lakeview Auditorium, since we've talked about that in the past.
that's
The Children's Museum is in a building that
we own.
and that we by written agreement could own. Yes, ma'am.
And the Houston Museum of Natural
Yes, sir.
Science.
Right.
Yeah, those I knew we owned, but that's really where I was hitting a stumbling block because I thought it's called Sugarland Auditorium, but you could.
It is Sugarland.
Okay.
Still sure.
It's owned by a different entity, and I didn't think we should be putting city money into something owned by a different entity. And if that is and that's why I said I wanted to make sure that this was that there was something that made sense, that it's Sugarland taxpayer money or money raised here that's going towards buildings owned here, museums, and every one of the museums is actually within a building owned by Sugarland, so that all makes sense. I'm fine with that as long as there's that limitation. But if it's owned by some other entity, then I don't know that this is an appropriate thing to do. That opens up a can of worms. So.
Okay.
Yes, sir. So just to summarize, we will move forward with bringing the policy forward for your consideration and action.
Thank you, Jennifer. 6B, review of a discussion on draft revision to the zoning classifications and parking requirements found in the Development Code of the City of Sugarland. And we have Ruth Lummer, our city planner, long range. Hi, Ruth.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. I am here to talk to you about the Development Code, and I'm going to start by providing you a background. giving you an overview of the Development Code Update Phase 2A, talk to you about what P&Z did, the public input we've received, and then our next steps. The Development Code was originally adopted in 1997. At the time, it was a consolidation of numerous development regulations that were kind of scattered throughout the Code of Ordinances and individual ordinances, and so it was taking all of those and putting them in one place together as the Development Code. It includes things like our zoning regulations, our sign regulations, adoption of our building codes, subdivision regulations, flood damage reduction regulations, as well as some others. These regulations all protect the quality of life of our residents by regulating the development and use of property. They are the basis by which we review plans that come in for changes to or development of property. Between 1997 and 2013, the city did some targeted updates of the Development Code over time, including adopting, for example, building finish standards, the bulk plane regulations, as well as parking garage regulations. But in 2013, we began a strategic project to do a more comprehensive review of the code. And so this is really the first comprehensive review that we've done since its adoption in 1997. There were quite a few items that we had identified that we felt like needed to be updated and addressed. As you can imagine, things have changed a lot since 1997. And so phase one of the Development Code occurred from 2013 to 2015, and it included a detailed review of the code. We looked at every chapter, every section, and kind of diagnosed that. We also had a consultant that helped us go through that and reviewed all of that with the Planning and Zoning Commission and several groups of people. In the end, the phase one was adopted in 2015, and it included some housekeeping items, things like just making the code more user-friendly, taking long sections of text and turning it into tables, including diagrams in the code, things like that. And then we also addressed a few high-priority policy items, which included the implementation of the pedestrian and bicycle master plan, addressing some issues related to vested rights, and then some changes to our planned development district zoning. Since the adoption of phase one in 2015, we have been working on phase two. And we actually broke that down even further into multiple phases because it has a large number of items. And so what we are looking at with you this evening is phase 2A, and it's really focusing on modernizing and simplifying the zoning use classifications and the parking. And then there's some revisions to other sections that are really tied to the revisions that are happening to the zoning use classifications. So as I mentioned, we are changing, there's several chapters that are changing as a result of phase 2A, including chapters 1, 2, 9, and 10. But really our main focus, what we've been spending all of our time on, and a lot of our time on, is in chapter 2, which is the zoning regulations. And it all relates to the zoning use classifications. We did work with a consultant who helped us kind of transition from the old land use classifications to the new. And we also worked with some other departments in the city. Another noteworthy thing that we did was that we did look at the existing businesses in the city to make sure that we weren't creating a lot of nonconformities as we made the change from the old to the new. And we worked with economic development to make sure that we incorporated our target industries into the appropriate zoning districts. We worked with our communications department as well to prepare a video that I just want to show you so you can get a little background and a little more information in a more fun fashion than me just telling you about it.
It's not that anything was wrong with fashion in the 80s. It's just better now. It's not that anything was wrong with cell phones in the 80s. They are just better now. It's not that computers were bad. They are just better now. And it's not that Sugar Land's zoning classifications were bad. They are just way better now. Sugar Land's current zoning classifications were adopted in 1997, but was based off a code written in 1987. Now Sugar Land is making a few changes to the zoning use classifications in the development code. But this isn't about changing the standards that make Sugar Land great. It's about making a modern and easy-to-use system to keep Sugar Land's development consistent and organized. Kind of like taking 43 megabytes of data on floppy disks and turning that into, like, an email or two. We want you to see how we are improving the zoning classifications yourself. So put away your shoulder pads, trim your mullet, and visit sugarlandtx.gov/devcodeupdate and see how Sugar Land is improving the zoning classifications in the development code for you, your community, and your business.
Okay. So I want to say a special thanks to Jake, who was our
I know that voice.
production guy on the video. He did a really great job. I think it turned
Go
out.
on the map.
Whoopsies.
Oh, there you go. He's back.
Susan Boyle. I'm nearly 48.
Sorry about that. Oh gosh, I don't know how to get back to it. Sorry about that. Oh, that's it. Okay, it's not on the right side. Okay, I apologize. Oh, there's got to be a better way. One moment. Thank you. Okay, there we are. Sorry for the interlude there. So as was mentioned in the video, really one of the main goals of this project was to update our use classifications and to modernize them. But we also wanted to consolidate some requirements that are in other parts of the development code directly into the use tables. We wanted to formalize and codify some commonly placed restrictions and revise some of the requirements based on our experiences in applying the code for the last 20 years. But what we're not doing with this development code update is change the character of our zoning districts. We're not expanding permitted uses. We're not removing safeguards that are currently in place, and we're not changing any restrictions on multifamily. And so now I'm just going to walk you through some of these goals and give you some examples of what we're talking about here. So first, modernizing the zoning use classification tables. As was mentioned in the video, our current use system is based on the standard industrial classification system. If you were on Planning and Zoning Commission, you're familiar with that system. And it was an economic-based system that doesn't necessarily take into account land uses and how they impact one another. And so we want to go to a land use-based system that does take those things into account. We also want to make it more user-friendly and understandable to the average citizen and business owner. Most people don't have this book lying around their homes or their businesses, and so it's not as easy as it could be for them to know where business is allowed and where it's not. We also wanted to eliminate unnecessary distinctions for uses that are similar, and then on the other side, separate out unlike uses. And then finally, to incorporate some new uses and kind of rename or reclassify uses to just make it more straightforward. So as an example of modernization, we are eliminating some unnecessary distinctions for uses that are similar. So in the current SIC, you have all of these uses going back to VHS tapes, newspapers, florists, men's suits. They all have their own classification. Under the new code, these will all just be classified as neighborhood retail because they're similar in how they function on a day-to-day basis. But on the other end, you have a lot of uses that are also kind of grouped together that don't necessarily belong together. They're not really very similar from a land use standpoint. You have a category that's just called repair shops, and it lumps everything from ship's boiler repair and tractor repair with instrument repair and small engine repair, which obviously those are not terribly similar. And so we're separating those out, and they're allotted into the zoning districts accordingly where they really belong. We've also clarified our compliance with some state and federal laws. One example of that is for community homes. According to the Texas Human Resources Code, we are required to authorize them in all of our residential zoning districts. We do currently do that, but you have to kind of thread the needle to figure it out. It's not totally obvious, and so we just wanted to make that very apparent that that is the case. We've incorporated some new uses and kind of renamed or reclassified them. Things have changed over the last 20 to 30 years, and so that was a really necessary part of this process. One example is independent senior living. It's currently grouped in with assisted living. This is something that didn't really exist in 1987 when the SIC codes were created. And so this independent senior living category allows us to distinguish it from assisted living and multifamily very clearly. But it is allowed in the same districts under the new code as it is today. It just has its own designation. Another example is microbreweries. Those have become popular over the last several years, and right now the way that we can classify that is under the same classification as a big alcohol manufacturing facility, plant. And so we want to have a separate category for microbreweries so that they can be allowed in some places where that would be appropriate, where you wouldn't have a big production plant. The second goal was to consolidate some requirements that are currently kind of dispersed throughout the development code into the use tables to make it easy for people to find those regulations and kind of make some connections between them. The first thing we did was incorporate definitions directly into the table. Right now, someone is required to either look at the SIC book or to look in Chapter 10, which is our definitions, to be able to figure out how a use is defined. And so this way, once you find your use classification, you can look at the definition. It makes it very clear what use goes under what classification. Similarly, we've also brought parking into the table. So this really helps us clarify what ratios apply to which uses. Currently, parking is separated in a different section of the code, and there's about 30 kind of general land or descriptions for parking, whereas for our land uses, there's about 300. And so there's a lot of kind of room for interpretation as to which parking ratio goes with which land use. One example of that is where if someone wanted to come in and do like a doctor's or therapist's office, there's currently a classification for an office building, which is one parking space for every 250 square feet. But then there's also a medical clinic designation for parking, which is one for 200 square feet. So it's not clear to the average person which one, that fits under. And so under the new system, you'll have a table that tells you, once you know what your use is, you know exactly what your parking is as well. And then there are a few other requirements that are in other parts of the code that we've also brought into the table, including regulations associated with accessory dwelling units, home occupations, and then hotels. Our third goal is to formalize and codify commonly placed restrictions and conditions. These are restrictions and conditions that have come out of conditional use permits and our planned development zoning districts over the last several years that we feel like are appropriate for uses. Some of them are uses that are allowed by right, so they may not have to go through a special zoning process, but they will still have to abide by these new restrictions. And then some of them are for conditional use permits where there will be kind of some base standard requirements, and then the PNC and City Council would be looking at other things through the CUP process. So just some examples are for drive-through facilities. There are requirements relating to speaker orientation as it relates to residential properties and buffering from those residential properties. Also, assisted living and independent senior living, requiring that they have a common dining element, an exercise facility, and as well as some other amenities. And then finally, another example is for gas pumps at a gas station, requiring that they not have a flat canopy roof, that it be pitched or mansard, and that they have recessed lighting. There's restrictions on speakers and things like that. So again, those are all things that we have historically included in conditional use permits or in our PDs. And we feel like it shouldn't have to go through that process just to have those kind of basic requirements. Goal 4, the final one, is to revise some of the requirements based on our 20 years of experience in applying the land use categories as they are today. We want to just kind of generally better categorize uses so that it's easy to identify what's permitted, what might be a conditional use, and what's a prohibited use. We're also clarifying permitted and conditional uses where they are in character with other uses in the zoning districts or just generally in character with a district. So for example, right now, a sandwich shop or a restaurant in the business office district is required to go through a conditional use permit. The only exception to that is if it's an ancillary use, which is basically just a very small establishment within an office building that's 50,000 square feet or more. So the vast majority of restaurants of any kind in the business office district have to go through that rigorous, long process. And we feel like that this is an appropriate use that can serve our offices. And so we are suggesting that it be revised to be permitted by right, except where there is a drive-through or if it's greater than 5,000 square feet. We are also suggesting some changes to units of measurement for parking. So going from undependable units that can change to definitive constant factors. So an example of this is where For restaurants, right now, whenever someone submits a plan for a restaurant, we look at it and we have to ask how many employees are there. The parking is based on the number of employees. Well, that's not something we can confirm or not through the plan review process, and it's something that can change over time. And so we have changed that one to measuring by square footage. So the number of parking spaces will be required based on the square footage of the establishment instead of the number of employees. Another example of where we are revising based on our experience is looking more specifically at our parking requirements. We did look at really every use through this process and kind of asked ourselves, is this the right parking ratio for this use? We did, in most cases, keep the same parking ratios that we have today, but there are some examples where we have recommended an increase or a decrease in the number of parking that would be required. So a couple of uses that we would recommend increasing are for long-term acute care facilities or rehab hospitals, going from 1 space for every 2 units plus 1-to-1 employee to 2 spaces for every resident. And then places of worship, going from 1 for every 4 seats where you have fixed seating in the assembly area, or 1 for 100 square feet for if there's not fixed seating, to having 1 for every 3 seats or 1 for every 75 square feet. So that's about a 30% increase in the parking that would be required for a place of worship. For decreasing requirements, we are, just an example is for libraries, museums, and art galleries, going from 1 to 200 to 1 to 300. So that wraps up the kind of general overview of all of the changes. Since this is the development code, it is required to go to the Planning and Zoning Commission, and obviously we definitely want their input. They are the ones that use this document all the time. We started with an introductory workshop with the commission on August 14th, where we just kind of gave them a broad overview, and then we delved into detail of all of the changes with them in 4 different workshops, so about an hour to 2 hours each. So we spent a lot of time with the commission going over all of the changes in detail. And then provided them a summary of all of their feedback, confirmed that the changes that we thought we heard is what they wanted, and they held a public hearing on October 25th and then unanimously recommended approval of the changes on November 13th. Throughout the process, they generally concurred with staff's recommendations. They just had a few changes of things that they wanted us to look at or questions and things like that. So that is all documented in a document that's available for review as well. Throughout this process, we wanted to make sure that we had a transparent process for review and adoption of these changes. So we have used a variety of communication tools throughout. I think I may have mentioned earlier, we had a project webpage, sugarlandtx.gov/dev-code-update, and that is still up and running. And it has a lot of information. We have been posting all of the draft materials that we've been giving to the Planning and Zoning Commission for their review, all of the draft code changes. There are links to all of the Planning and Zoning Commission meetings as well as the City Council meetings, so that it's very easy for interested people to find the information, FAQs as well as the informational video that we watched earlier. We've posted information about the update on social media a few different times, and we also had an online town hall that lasted for 2 months throughout the Planning and Zoning Commission review of the project. We did a press release, and then we've also done some emails to our business and development community partners through the Economic Development Department to let them know about the process. The best way that we were able to get information out, though, was through the web page. And so just for example, on the homepage, we had over 1,000 page views, and almost 900 of those were unique page views. And then the education and resources page, which is where we had a lot of the information we presented to P&Z and things like that, also had some pretty good traffic on it. As far as feedback from the public, we really have only had a handful of kind of comments or inquiries that have been directly related to the information in the draft changes. We had 2 citizens that inquired specifically about the changes, just wanting to know, what was going on, what we were doing. And then 2 developers that specifically commented on supporting one or more of the changes that were proposed. We had quite a bit of comments and inquiries that weren't directly related to, people kind of pick up on certain things that they read and kind of go with that. So in the online town hall, we had 3 comments. At the Planning and Zoning Commission meetings, we did have 1 speaker that spoke 3 different times. But again, all of this was really unrelated to the draft changes that are before you, that will be before you. So as a result of, there weren't any substantive changes that were made as a result of any of the comments during the review process. So we are here before you tonight to receive your feedback and just make sure you're comfortable with us moving forward with an ordinance, which is our next step. And we would be bringing forward Ordinance 2149 to adopt the changes at your February 5th meeting, along with a public hearing. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Ruth. Ruth, we've also got our chair of the Planning and Zoning Commission, Kathy Hebner's with us tonight. Kathy, thank you for coming. Clarifying questions to staff, Amesh.
Getting back to the process, we have a group of development partners that will seek advisory on certain issues and things. Did we bring this to that group to see if they had any input?
So that is, I think you're referring to the development committee, and
correct.
That group is no longer in place.
Okay.
It was eliminated a couple of years ago. We found that the people that were left were not, I'm trying to think of how to
say it politically correct.
It was a different group that were involved with the processes now.
They were consultants as opposed to developers.
Right, okay.
And we were, we used to be dealing with large tract developers, and there's
right.
less of that now. And so it's just, it's got, they had less value, I think, to the process. This is going to impact the people who are already here for the most part. And so we wanted to make sure to notify existing landowners, retail, property owners and things like that.
But okay, so thanks for answering that question.
Sure.
So with that, in that regard, do you feel like you've surveyed that group well enough to have a positive outcome of what their belief is on this document?
We haven't really gotten much response from them, so it's hard for me to say that I feel like we've gotten enough. But the fact that we haven't heard anything, I feel like also says something that if there was grave concerns, I think we would have heard from them. I will also note that though the change is significant because it is going from one classification system to another, when you really get to the granular, it's not significant changes. So what was allowed largely will still be allowed. And so that's really what, kind of where the rubber meets the road. That's what people want to know, and that's what really matters.
I kind of see it more as just a format change, essentially. You're
right, it's a modernization. And so
up.
Through that, there are some changes that are somewhat more substantive, but largely there's not significant changes that are going to have, negative impacts on people.
Mayor, I'm supportive of moving this forward. So.
Carol?
Thank you, Mayor. Well, Ruth, I'd like to thank you and the Planning Department for all of your hard work on this. You've done a great job. And Kathy, I'd like to thank the P&Z Commission for the thorough review that the Commission did of this. Mm-hmm. And I think changing the classification systems will make this much more user-friendly. And also I like the idea that y'all increase the parking requirements for hospitals, because that's one thing that definitely tend to be short at hospitals is parking. Now, which consultant did you work with on this?
It was Freeze and Nichols that helped us with this part of the process. They helped us do the conversion from the SIC to the new land use system. They kind of came up with the initial draft of the new land use classifications, but we worked very closely with them throughout the process, and this definitely has staff's handprints all over it. So.
Okay, and also this was phase 2A. So what other phases is phase 2 divided into, and what does that look like, and what are their timeframes?
That is a very good question, and I won't be able to fully answer it, but some of the things that will be coming forward in the future will be actions out of the land use plan, the implementation of the land use plan, and then there are also some other changes that staff had previously identified. Telecommunications towers is outdated and will need to be updated at some point. There's a lot of it that just we just haven't, we've been so busy just developing that we haven't taken the time to evaluate or haven't had the time to, kind of keep some things up to date. So it'll be, some of that as well.
Thank you.
Bridget.
Would you mind clarifying or reviewing the changes to home occupations and then additional dwellings?
Yes, so home occupations and the accessory dwelling units, there were actually no changes to the regulations that are in place. All we did was move them into the land use table so that there is a land use that is called out that says accessory dwelling units, and then it tells you where they're allowed, and then the additional regulations that are associated with it are in the notes section of this table instead of being in a completely different section. We feel like this is where people go to look for that kind of information, and so it's just literally consolidating it into this table.
Great, thank you.
Amy?
First of all, I concur with Councilmember McCutcheon's comments that this is really a job well done and necessary. I think it is good to modernize it and simplify it, and I think y'all have done a great job. I'm not sure how to ask this question properly, but recently I received a complaint about the amount of traffic that's over by the Performing Arts Center, and that's our largest area that we are going to be developing. And how does this affect the Track 5 development?
So Tract 5 is going to be developing under a planned development district, which we have in a lot of, Telfair and other parts of the community. And any PDs that come forward kind of from here on out will be under this new land use classification system. I can't speak to, and I don't know that it's pertinent necessarily to this conversation as the traffic and its impacts and all of that, but the PDs that come forward in the future will be utilizing the new land use classification system instead of the old SIC system.
So this would be the one that's applicable when planning and zoning looks at Track 5?
That is, yes, that is the plan.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Ruth. Kathy, anything you'd like to add?
Really nothing. I think we really went over it with a fine-tooth comb and made all the changes down to even questioning some things like the homes that are owned by churches where clergy live, and looking at even, whether it was legal to limit those, and looking at what the Supreme Court might think about certain things. I mean, we really went over it with a fine-tooth comb, and so I can confidently say that it was unanimously recommended by P&Z as you have it before you tonight.
Thank you, Kathy. So I'm going to summarize. I take it from that the council is ready to have staff bring us forward the policy and action. Jennifer?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Kathy. Item number 7, City Council City Manager Report, 7A. Amy, we're going to start with you.
And I'm happy to report. I have nothing to report.
There we go. Ramesh?
No report, Mayor. Just Happy New Year to everyone. So,
Bridget?
Ditto.
Carol?
Oh, I'll comment. Most of the council attended the Leadership and Legacy Luncheon, honoring posthumously Herb Apple in the individual category and Nalco in the business category, and that was just a really, really great event, and I'd like to thank staff for that. And I attended the Holiday Lights at Constellation, and that was beautiful. And I attended the Home for the Holidays pet adoption event, and I was really excited that a number of pets were adopted during the event that day, and I'd like to thank staff for doing that. And Rick Ramirez and I hosted the state legislative staff at the Moscow Ballet's Nutcracker at Smart Financial Center.
Thank you, Carol. Jennifer?
No report really, just that I attended the Commissioners Court meeting this morning to observe our new leadership in action for Fort Bend County.
Thank you, Jennifer. The only thing I'll report on at the Houston-Galveston Area Council Transportation Policy Council, we recognized Commissioner Patterson and Judge Emmett for their significant contribution to our 13-county region. James was on that commission for 20 years. Judge Emmett was on it for about 16 years. Both of them are transportation acknowledged experts. We're losing that experience, but we'll replace it with other folks that are coming on. Jennifer, item number B.
No, sir. Happy New Year.
All right, number 8, closed executive session. 8A, closed executive session is authorized by Chapter 551 Texas Government Code in accordance with Section 551-087, deliberation regarding economic development negotiations, and we're going to adjourn in the council dining room. Thank you all for coming.
Hey, Whitney.